Hey, today we start a new series. Aren't you glad? I love this church.
I love it.
I do too. You can make mistakes and find grace. It's so good. I really do love being part of this congregation. I feel loved, and I hope you do too. If you're new here, we certainly want you to know that you can belong to a community of believers that love the Lord, and we are not perfect. And we just come together and keep inspiring and encouraging one another to be more like Jesus. That's why we are here today. So we start this new series called Don't Give Up. You would have saw a really cool intro video. You can see it next week. How about that? But we're looking at Hebrews chapter 12 and 11 over the next few weeks. And as a pastor, you know that I probably talk to a lot of people that have difficult problems. Some of you are in teacher roles, mentor roles, coaching roles, maybe yourself, maybe you've even served in some type of pastoral ministry, and people come to you with problems, and when they come to you, you're trying to encourage them, but I often find myself repeating some similar phrases. The application might be a little bit different. Their situation might need a little bit of specific encouragement, specific prayers, but I often find myself coming back to the same truths that are found in Scripture to encourage people through troubles. I'll give you a few examples of the type of situations that I've encountered. Young couples been married for years, they're fighting a lot, and they've come to the conclusion that they would be better off just to give up and end the marriage. An older lady struggled with deep depression for many, many years, and she wonders how long it will be before she'll ever be happy again. Marriage that has been on the rocks for decades, and they're wondering why even try to move forward. Family with a special needs child, it just wears them out, day in, day out, and they're wondering, will there ever be a time where they don't feel exhausted? So when we hear things like this, maybe this sounds familiar to you. We need these types of words spoken into our lives. Don't give up. Keep believing. So it's simple. I know the phrases are simple, but they're profound when they're rested in knowing Jesus. That's what makes these words not just trite. These words have great significance when we know who's behind these words. And it's certainly not me. Certainly not you, it's the Lord Himself. And so when we feel overwhelmed and discouraged, these are the type of messages that we need to hear. We need to hear. So what does this type of encouragement look like? Well, for years, I thought maybe the best approach was sort of the Mr. Rogers approach, right? So you remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? He put on a little cool sweater, you know, so imagine sweater pastor, he's giving these kind words saying it's going to be okay, it's going to be all right. But after some years of ministry, I think I'm moving more towards the William Wallace approach. Remember William Wallace, Braveheart? Remember the guy that's fighting for the Scottish independence, and he had the paint on his face? And he would say things like this, he would say, don't quit, keep fighting, get back in there, run the race. I know you're tired, don't give up, stand up, move forward, right? There's times in our lives where we need some compassion, I get that. But most of us need to hear a message of standing firm and not giving up. Because this life is a vapor, it's a mist, but there's times it feels like an eternity, right? We've had those experiences. And so we hear these types of phrases repeated in our head all the time. You might as well let go. Nothing's ever going to change. It's too late for you now. God doesn't care. This is what you deserve. Well, we're going to drop the big red X on that, all right? Yeah. That is a lie. Those are lies. If you said those things to yourself, or if someone said that to you, they are not a messenger of God. Those are not messages from the Lord. Those are lies, and they are not true. And so a lot of times our biggest critic is ourselves. We can be our worst enemy, right? We get that. But what we have to understand is that when we feel sorry for ourselves, we're not doing ourselves any favor or making anyone else better, right? And so Sometimes we actually get hurt and upset when we don't receive the sympathy that we want to receive from someone. Like, we're like, hey, give me some sympathy, you know? Give me some slack. But usually what we need is strength. Most of us, many of us, need some courage more than comfort. This might sound kind of harsh, but I'm just trying to keep it real, right? Spoken into our hearts and our souls when circumstances look bleak and the road ahead looks grim. We need courage more than comfort. We really do. UVA coach Tony Bennett, one of my faith heroes here of recent year. I like basketball. I'm not a big Virginia fan. I'm not a big any sports team fan. But anyway, in 2018, at the beginning of the NCAA tournament, they were #1 seed going in. So if you're not familiar with college basketball, there's this system of grading, and so teams start out in this tournament. And oftentimes, the #1 teams just are knocking out all the lower-ranked teams. Well, UVA goes in at #1. They play a very low-ranked team, and they lose. And it was a humiliating defeat. And he received all kinds of ridicule and criticism. I mean, there was no lack of that. And he could have become defensive. He could have made excuses. He could have quit. He could have walked away, right? Why put up with that? But see, Tony Bennett's a Christian. I mean, he's an out front Christian. And his primary role as a coach is to instill Christian values into his players, not make them NBA stars. Because most of them won't be, right? His primary role is to be a godly example to the men that he leads. And so, following last year's humiliating defeat, there's a quote that he made in the locker room that he repeated to his players over and over again. And I can't wait to put this up on the screen. But it's one of my favorite quotes. And you might want to write this down, write it down on your neighbor's forearm or something like that. So, if you learn to use adversity right, it will buy you a ticket to the place you couldn't have gone any other way. Isn't that cool? That is just a great quote. And it's spoken out of the hardship that he suffered, probably outside basketball. He's probably learned this in other places in his life. Adversity will take us to a new level of faith, a new position with our understanding of who God is that we could not achieve in any other way. And so Hebrews 11 and 12 are chapters that are really speaking courage into our lives. And so we're going to look at this verse often throughout this series, but first Hebrews 1 or 12, 1 through 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, key phrase there, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I mean, that is a loaded verse, and we could spend a lot of time unpacking it, and I hope that you do. I hope that we can get some really important truths out of this. But this passage of Scripture comes to a group of people that are Jews that are following Christ, and for different reasons they are suffering different types of opposition and persecution. So this Hebrew writer knows that some of them have given up, and he knows some of them are thinking about it. And there are others who are yet to face the persecution, and he's prepping them to get ready for the hard times that will come. And so he gives them this instruction to prepare them to not give up, to not lose hope. First thing he says, listen to the crowd of witnesses. They stand above us. They are in the cloud. Now, I don't think they have an awareness of what we're going through. It's more important that we understand what they've gone through and not giving up. We're surrounded by a fan club. We're surrounded by people who've gone on before us. And so the word therefore points back to chapter 11. So in chapter 11, we have this very famous chapter in the Bible. If you're new to the Bible and you've never read a chapter, this is a great one to start at. Just read about it. It's these stories of people, little brief snippets of their stories, and how they remain faithful under immense opposition. And so we call it the Faith Hall of Fame or the Hero Hall of Fame, chapter 11. And these people did not give up, even though it was hard, even though they failed, even though there were forces and impossible situations that they faced. They kept on moving forward to be obedient to what God was calling them to do. And so the first guy we're going to talk about is Abraham. And so we can look at some other characters, but we're going to start with him. And we read in chapter 11, verse 8, "It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave his home." Southern Turkey is where he was at, around Haran. That's the ancient name. And God would call him to give him as an inheritance. And so he went without knowing where he was going. So he's going to go 950 miles, or 955 miles, we might say, from Haran down to where God's going to lead him. Now here's the thing, he doesn't know where he's going. Not only is he leaving behind everything that he's very familiar with, he's going to a place that he doesn't know what the address is. Like, how frustrating would that be? How about if somebody tells you, "Hey, I want you to go somewhere. Where are we going?" "I'm not telling you. Just start driving." Like we go, like, "I'm not doing that. Like, give me an address," right? I got to put it in my little phone, right? So the faith that Abraham has is more than just leaving what he knows. It's going where he has no really example to follow. Remember, he's a pioneer of faith for us. So he doesn't have any cool Rick Warren books to read. Like, No Purpose-Driven Life here. Like, Rick Warren needs him to write the book, right? He doesn't have any, like, Christian playlist on a Spotify, whatever. He doesn't have any of that. There's no inspiring videos to watch. There's no great testimonies of missionaries who remain faithful. Like, he doesn't have any of that. The only thing he has is a command. That's it. Go. I'm going. I mean, when I think about Abraham, and I've thought about him many years, different times, and read scriptures like this, I'm more and more impressed with the faith that he had in the Lord. I mean, it's inspiring. And so, here's the truth that we find in Abraham's story, that we find in our own story, all right? And here it is. There is no risk-free life. It doesn't exist. We want it. We buy insurance to mitigate any type of bad things that are going to happen to us. But the risk-free life, the life with no trouble, does not exist. Whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, there is no risk-free life. There's a philosopher that works a lot with businesses. His name is Larry Lawden, and he studies risk management. And he came up with this term that is about people who are so fear-driven. We live in a kind of a fear-driven society, right? Every time you turn on the news, there's a terrible weather thing going on, and the weather's getting terrible, and we're all going to be destroyed by a snow hurricane or something crazy, right? I mean, and then it's like, it's this over here, and these problems get, they just keep exploding in our face through media and news, and like, what happens, what Larry says, is risk lock, where we keep from making a decision. We get in risk lock. We get stuck. We get stagnant. We're not moving forward because we're frozen in fear. Last week I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about the downturn in marriages among young couples in their 20s. And the primary reason why people are not marrying is fear. They fear it's going to fail. So why bother? Let's just kind of shack up for a while and hang out for a while, and when that doesn't work out, we'll just move on. And so, marriage, or any valuable relationship, is going to involve risk and commitment, right? For better, for worse, right? I mean, if Marie knew what she was getting into when she married me, she would have not done it. There's a good reason why we kind of put some of that stuff in the closet. Oh, by the way, I've got this weird habit. So I stand on my head when I sleep, or whatever it is, whatever it might be. So any worthwhile relationship is going to require risk. And so it's a challenge to our faith to not give up when things happen that we never saw coming. It really is. And so we have all these Bible heroes. And chapter 11 begins with this phrase, faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. I mean, if you think about this for a while, it's like, really? Yeah, how can I be certain of what I do not see? Well, that's the way faith works. That's the way I think a lot of times people have a hard problem buying into Christianity or deciding, oh, I'll try this church. They want to see it, touch it, feel it, right? It's like, is it Oklahoma? It's a show me state? Missouri, okay. Well, I can't pick on you today. So, but let's just say next for Missouri. It's show me state. All right. That's not on my notes. Oh, imagine that. So, the Bible says that we have to be convinced that God has the future. We don't know the future. We can't see how it's all going to fit. But we can keep moving forward because we trust our mighty God and His plan. Don't trust in the circumstances. Trust in God. We build our lives trusting on circumstances. House inspection, right? We do the search on a used car to see if it's been in any accidents, right? Like we want to build all these decisions based on things that we know and can prove. But it doesn't work that way with God and following Him. He requires us to step out on faith. And that's why these stories of Bible heroes are so important for us to know. Their experiences teach us things. They're just not flannel graph stories that we learned in Sunday school or names that people throw out. There are stories behind these people that are written for our admonition and teaching to learn from. So we should know them. So if you don't know these stories or the people that you read about in Hebrews chapter 11, if you have a Bible that has little numbers beside it, those are footnotes and those are references back to their stories. And so Abraham's story begins in Genesis chapter 12, and it goes on quite for a while. And there's a lot to learn there. There's an Olympic event called the Super G. All right, and so in the Super G, the skiers go down this really fast downhill, but here's the catch. They go as teams. They're, team from America, team from France, whatever. So they go down these hills, but they don't get to go down the track before they go down the track. In other words, they can walk it, they can look at it, but they don't get to ski it until the event. And so the first guys down, or first girls down, really are in for some surprises. Like it's faster than they thought, or that turn's rougher than they thought. But when they get to the bottom, they're allowed to radio back up to their team members. And they'll say, hey, watch turn 2, it's really rough, or that downhill is way faster than any of us thought. And so their information relayed back up to their team members is so helpful for them to have a successful run. That's what the heroes of faith are to us. They've gone down the path that God has led them, or even the mistakes that they made. And they're radioing back to us through their stories that have been recorded to us. Just think about this. We have this book that we call the Bible. It's actually a 66 book, written over 1,500 years from 22 different countries, 3 different continents, written in 3 languages. It's got one common thread. Isn't that amazing? And that's what we carry around. That's our manual for living. And so I love stories. If you hang out with me, I'll say, tell me your story. Or my grandsons will, Papa, tell us a story. And so I love stories because we learn so much from stories because it's like real life. And so that's why it's important to hear these people who've gone down to the bottom of the hill and they're radioing back up. Hey, watch out. Listen, when it's a rough turn, lean hard into God. Don't trust in your own strength, your own ability. Don't trust that. Lean into the Lord. That's what they're telling us. And so that's why so important. So stories of faith provide us perspective to keep us from feeling like a victim. Our country loves feeling like a victim. Man, I'm telling you, it's a real problem. It's not only a problem socially, like in many ways, but it's a problem in faith. We live in a world that is trying to become victims. I don't get it. And so, signs of victim mentality. So, I mean, I read this and sometimes I'm like, this isn't all about, just any one person, but signs of victim mentality, they blame others for their circumstances. Wrong side of the tracks. That's where I was born. They possess a life against me philosophy. Everybody's against me. Think I'll go eat some worms, right? They are cynical or pessimistic all the time. It's never sunshiny, beautiful day. They feel powerless. They love sharing their tragic stories. Like, you'll be saying, hey, man, I went to a great restaurant. Yeah, last night, man, my back was killing me. Like, what? They have a habit of blaming those they love for how they feel. Like the people who are closest to them have the hardest time dealing with that. They're constantly putting themselves down, like all those lies, right? And they refuse to analyze their beliefs and change their behaviors. If we make new decisions, we can find a new outcome. But you actually have to make a new decision. Based on this information, I take this new action, and it will result in this thing. So my life's really messed up. Hey, have you come to church? Are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? Are you hanging out with people that love you, that know Jesus? You do those three things, and guess what will happen? Your life will begin to be healed of things that you thought were impossible to be healed from. I've watched it happen over and over again. God is faithful. And He loves us. He loves us more than we love ourselves. I believe that. And so that's why stories of faith are so important. In 2001, after my divorce was final, I was feeling really sorry for myself, right? I was a victim, right, of my own making, maybe, right, or whatever. And I remember, on this mission trip that followed the finalization of my divorce, I'm sitting in India in an office of Ajay Lal, the missionary leader there, big mission in India. And he's gathered all these preachers into his office. I think there were 15, 16 of these guys, right? Gathered into his office. And they began to share their stories of suffering. And I wanted to crawl under the chair. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Because their faithfulness, with the suffering that they had gone through, was inspirational. And I walked away from that experience thinking, I've got nothing to complain about. Not even that. I want to move to where they're at. Maybe it's going to require some type of... Maybe I'll make a decision that will take me way out of my comfort zone so I can follow the Lord. Maybe I'm going to give up something that I once held valuable so that I can do more for the Lord. Like that. That's the kind of inspiration that comes. That's why people who follow Jesus do crazy things. Like move from wherever, or go talk to that person, or give that away so that this can happen, whatever it might be. So keep believing in God who can do the impossible. We really need to hear this. And by faith, even Sarah, right, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, meaning Abraham, and he as good as dead, right? I want to say a joke, but I'm not. Hold it back. Came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand in the seashore. So, you think Abraham and Sarah's faith was perfect? It was not. It was miserably a failure at times. Sarah gets tired of waiting on God's promise, so she says, "Hey, honey. Hey, Abe. Sleep with my handmaiden Hagar." That was practice in those. Many times people would have surrogate mothers to their children, so the wife didn't have to go through the pain of childbearing. And so they'd pick a slave or a servant, and that would be. And so it wasn't like totally weird for her to suggest that. But Abraham's like, okay, what a goofball. This is a bad idea. It's always a bad idea. But he did it. You know what? God worked through that. He didn't quit working with him. Total failure in faith. Yet God works with him. So when we say heroes of faith, we're not meaning that they get it stellar or right all the time. They have some miserable decisions that they've made. And so God did not give up on them. And take note that God continues to strengthen Abraham and Sarah's faith because a big trial is coming up in their lives, and we read about it. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. Now, nowhere in the Bible does God require human sacrifice. Now, there are other pagan gods that did, Moloch and gods like that. They had systems of religion where children were offered to these gods for some type of... It's throwing the girl in the volcano, it's all that, right? But Abraham didn't know that's what God was not going to ask him to do. God asked him to do it. Like again, there's no Rick Warren book to read about, no Max Lucado book to read about, right? And it's not there. So all he knows to do is like, this is what God asked me to do. I guess he gave me the son miraculously. He can bring him back from the dead. So up they go. March up the hill, Mount Moriah. We think it's the same mount that the crucifixion happened on many thousand years later. And so, from the passage in Genesis 22:12, the Lord speaks to him on that mount. He says, don't do anything against him, meaning his son Isaac. He says, for I know that you are one who fears God. That you passed this test of faith. Now, here's what I want to point out. When did this test of faith come in his walk with God? It came at the end, not the beginning. God builds our strength. Little trial, I do 20 reps with 12 pounds. I move up next week, You can tell I don't know what I'm talking about. So, just saying. You're going to have to look somebody else. It's a terrible illustration. So, but the point is this, that the point is this, that trials come to the end of our life. So I remember my mom, she got real discouraged after Dad died. And she told us, she confessed later on, that she kind of just wanted to die herself. And so she kind of quit taking care of herself, we think, maybe, I don't know. But she had a stroke. And she lost all her ability on her right side of her body. She's right-handed. She lives alone. And she went through some really low times. After that, she fell a couple times. Broke her hip twice, broken arm. I remember calling her one day, and she was trying to get her blouse on, and she's like, I could hear her tears holding it back, because she's just so frustrated, because she couldn't get her shirt on, And I remember sitting at the house one night with her, and I said, Mom, I've just been reading through Abraham's life, and here's what I've noticed. Sometimes the most difficult trials that we face come at the end of our faith walk, not the beginning. I call my mom almost every Monday. Usually I call her more than that, but throughout the week we'll just touch base every now and then. But, Mom, what you doing? If I call her at 9, here's what she tells me. I'm reading my Bible and I'm praying for y'all. How was church Sunday? My mom's like 87 years old. I hope I get that right. If she watches this and I'm wrong, I'm in trouble. Right? But I go, Mom, how old am I? And she's like, oh. Anyway, so we're even. But the point is that we really need to be applying these things to our life, because it's very likely that some of the most, and I know, aren't you glad you came moment, I know that most of us are going to face some really difficult trials later on in life. You need to be building your faith strength up. And that comes through doing what God has called us to do. And so, faith that gives you the confidence to keep believing and the courage to keep going is not faith in life circumstances. It's faith in God's character. Amen. So your whole world might blow up, but God's still present, right? He's still there. Faith that brings someone a special person, right, is amazing. But sometimes that same faith gives you the ability to be okay to be alone. I see God in both circumstances. God is present when a couple has a much wanted pregnancy and they have their first child. But God is also present with a couple that can never have children. And maybe they become a mentor to some foster children or some children from a dysfunctional home. God's present in both. God is present when a person is wrestling with an ongoing depression. It's always a dark cloud. And God is also present in the person's life that they find release from that. God is there in both of those situations. His presence is not revealed by your circumstances. His presence is there because He is everywhere. He's omniscient. He's all powerful. He's every aspect of this world in our souls. Sometimes a high school student goes to their place of learning and they lead others to Christ, or maybe they lead a Bible study. God's present. But God is also present with the high school student who's ridiculed and maligned over 4 years of their existence there for being a follower of Jesus. God's present in both of those circumstances. Sometimes your faith will lead you into the boss's office. Had a friend this happened to. And he told his boss that he would not lie to the clients of that company. Now, sometimes that gets somebody a promotion for their integrity. And sometimes it puts you in the unemployment line. God is present in both of those circumstances. Sometimes faith heals a husband of cancer. And sometimes faith supports the wife as she watches the casket of her husband lowered into the ground. God's present in both of those moments. Do you understand what I'm saying? You get it? He's always there. He's always present. If you think God's existence is based on your circumstances, you're going to be very frustrated about God. Because circumstances change. This life is not without risk. Our foundation is in God, not circumstances. So, all of you should have been given a little puzzle piece. Yeah, here's the answer, right? So you can pull that out right now if you want to. I'm asking you to hold on to this for at least a week if you can. If you can't, it's no big deal. All right? But in the weeks to follow, you're going to have an opportunity to bring it back and put it in the puzzle that it comes from. Now, you look at this one piece of puzzle, and there is no way that you can envision the picture that it belongs to, is it? There's no way. It's impossible. And this is what our life is like. We're just one story in God's big story. And there's no way in this life that you can see your whole life story. One day, when we join that cloud of witnesses, we'll get a bigger picture. When Jesus wraps it all up, says, that's it, everybody out of the pool, then we'll know the whole story, right? We'll know it all. We'll see it all. But we have to remember that we can't see the whole picture now. And many times the suffering that we go through, the really dark moments, we stop looking and thinking about the big picture, and all we can think about is this one little thing going on in our lives, right? But I'm telling you, God can bring good things out of bad things. Just look at the cross. God can take your terrible decisions of disobedience and bring good out of that. Look at me, right? Right? I mean, I was a joke, but what I'm saying is, like, I can look at you, some of you, right? What I'm saying is, like, God can bring purpose out of the most, what in the world is this about? Moments. And I didn't cuss. And some of you know what I mean. Like we can easily feel disappointed and disillusioned. But keep believing. You're going to be challenged to give up. Keep believing. You're gonna wonder that if these things wouldn't have happened, this is not where I wouldn't be right now, and you're wrestling with their bad behavior that's affected your life. Keep believing. One day, we're going to see the whole puzzle put together. And then we're going to have that aha moment. And we're going to go like, oh, that's why it happened. Let's pray.